So Diablo 4 Season 1 patch just brought about numerous major changes, some quite welcome and some probably not so much. And with that, here is my lightning round of 20 updates for Diablo 4 Season 1 that could make or even break the game. And starting off, we have the season mechanic, which I actually explained in much more depth in a video I'll link down below regarding Season 1 preparation. But anyhow, in summary, it's basically a new system where you can hunt for these special monsters called malignant monsters, and when you kill them, they have a chance of dropping these hearts that you can socket in any of your jewelry, being your amulet and rings. Now, there are going to be 32 different types of these gems, with each having a different type of color, with that color corresponding to the specific color in your jewelry that you can only then socket that heart into. And each of their specific effects has already been officially revealed, which I'll provide a link to in the description box. And of note is that many of these gems do look quite powerful, and keep in mind that you'll be able to socket up to 3 of them, and they better be impactful because of the various nerfs to classes across the board that I will get to shortly. And also you can target farm, sort of at least, these malignant hearts through special dungeons called malignant tunnels. And besides that, there's also a way to craft them by, say, salvaging some of the ones you don't need, and then using those materials to craft a new one. And alongside the seasonal mechanic, we also have the season journey, which is basically a set of objectives that'll incentivize you to do a variety of activities, and you can pick the ones you want as well to be able to earn various rewards and then also progress your battle pass. And the main incentive for progressing the battle pass is cosmetic rewards unique to the season. And not only that, but throughout the battle pass as well as in the season journey, you'll also earn a special currency called smoldering ashes that you can spend on various perks and buffs that'll only be active throughout the season as well. And next, most people already know that there will be a unique seasonal sort of uber boss, which most people assumed would be a max level pinnacle boss similar to Uber Lilith. But we've actually gotten confirmation that this will actually be more like a mini uber boss that you'll have to tackle at level 60 and then level 80 respectively, presumably as reward granting objectives of the new season journey. And I just like this as sort of a nice addition to the somewhat limited options for endgame content that we currently have. And moving on to some of the ways that one can actually carry progress over from the Eternal Realm, which is your non-seasonal characters, over to the seasonal characters, you probably already know that the map progress as well as Altars of Lilith and the stats that they grant, along with the renown that each grants, will actually also carry over to the seasonal characters. So that will give you a decent head start in terms of power and renown, which if you level up further will give you even more character power, right? And with the new patch, we actually also found a new change that'll help you accelerate your renown progress, which is that renown from completing side quests has actually been increased by 50%, going from 20 to 30, and that of dungeons has actually also gone from 30 to 40. And with there being dungeons and side quests that you can do simultaneously, you'll be able to earn up to 70 renown from doing those together. And next up, let's talk gearing, starting from defensive affixes. And this is where a lot of the complaints are coming from, for good reason I think as well. First off, there's just been a major nerf to defenses across the board for basically every class, starting with the defensive affixes, especially the damage reduction affixes that you'll usually get on chests and pants and in some other slots as well. These have been basically nerfed by quite a bit, as well as total armor affixes. They actually give less bonus armor too. And speaking of bonus armor, the very popular and previously extremely powerful, probably a bit overpowered I would say, disobedience or aspect of disobedience, which would also give you additional armor, was also nerfed quite heavily. But even among these nerfs, there are actually a few additions that I feel like could help the overall health of the game, at least in theory. And I also see what Blizzard is trying to do here, which is that it seems like they're trying to shift defenses away from just stacking toughness, but more to maneuvering and crowd controlling and playing a bit more strategically. And this is actually evidenced by them not only adding a few malignant hearts, which again are the new gems that you can socket into your jewelry, that actually come with various crowd control effects, such as, especially on the rogue and some other classes, these will actually allow you to, say, knock down or stun enemies, which will definitely help with survivability should you decide to use these specific gems, right? And there's also another new legendary aspect called Audacity, that allows you to stun enemies when too many are crowding around you, which could be helpful for both ranged and melee specializations. And another interesting choice that they've added is Barrier Generation can actually roll as an affix on every class, which could actually be an interesting and potentially viable choice, again, depending on how it scales and say how much is generated and so forth. Next, if you thought the nerfs to defensive affixes was bad, just wait till you see the ones that were also made to offensive affixes, especially the most dominant ones being critical strike damage and vulnerable damage. Now, I do kind of agree that vulnerable damage was way too powerful with its own damage bucket with how damage is calculated, but I'm still not sure if the buffs to the other damage affixes, and yes, there were a few buffs to say damage over time and other such affixes with conditions to them. I'm not sure if the increases to those would really offset the severe nerfs that we got on not only critical strike damage and vulnerable damage, but also to main stat on weapons. And on top of that, the values on cooldown reduction affixes were also nerfed, which makes certain builds that rely on that specifically also slightly less smooth. But again, similar to defensive affixes, I also noticed a couple of interesting things going on with the offensive side, which is first of all that Lucky Hit was actually not nerfed. If anything, Lucky Hit builds are actually sort of buffed, which is that they actually added a new affix. Well, this is actually not technically a new affix because it was rollable on sorcerers specifically, but now any class can actually roll the affix, which is that when you have a barrier, you'll increase your lucky hit chance. And alongside, again, the lucky hit affix values not being nerfed, unlike a lot of the other offensive stats, some niche builds that do rely on having a lot of lucky hit are actually going to do quite well relative to some of the other builds that were previously stronger, right? Such as the Minion Necromancer comes to mind if you have the unique ring, the Ring of Mendel, which in itself is not that common, but if you have that ring which relies on lucky hit procs to deal damage, you'll actually be quite well off with this change, or at least relatively untouched or not nerfed relative to the other specs. Speaking of which, there are also a few new unique items as well as legendary aspects that could help some existing builds or enable new builds, but none of them seem super powerful, except maybe the Druid one would be really good for, say, Trample Slide or like an Earth build. I guess the Barbarian one, Ancestral Charge, could be quite interesting, but time will tell whether it's actually good. And the Necromancer one could actually be quite decent for Blood builds, which desperately needed a buff. And last but not least, the unique items Eagle Horn as well as the Lidless Wall are not only cool callbacks to the older Diablo games, but also seem quite good as well. Now onto the class changes, there were a few buffs too, especially some of the underused specializations, but there were definitely quite a few nerfs as well. For the most part, and in summary, the rogue is largely untouched and they already have a lot of different types of builds that are viable, so that's great for them. The class seems to be in a good state. Druids, I think, actually needed the nerf that they got, because especially the Tornado Druid with like perma unstoppable or like 90% uptime unstoppable and like extreme movement speed and survivability and stuff like that with their healing as well was just a bit too ridiculous in my opinion, and I'm a Druid main too, playing that exact build, and also Lightning Storm by the way. So I thought Druids kind of deserved a nerf, and even after the nerfs, they're still going to be quite strong in my opinion. Barbs were actually nerfed a little bit despite looking like they got a few buffs, but one of their important passives only work on healthy enemies now, and it's a passive that I believe most builds take, so that's actually a pretty significant nerf to barbarian damage across the board. Necromancers saw their kind of overpowered, to be honest, Bone Spear build nerf, but apparently it's still viable, and a lot of the other builds got buffed, especially with Blood, and Minions got some love. I actually think Minions could be quite good, because it's actually pre-patched not too bad, and with some of these survivability nerfs across the board, with a minion build, I don't think it's affected as much by those survivability nerfs on defensive affixes, because for survivability you would usually be using your minions to soak up damage anyway, right? So that's not going to have as much of an effect on minion necromancers. And last but not least, well, maybe they are the least for now at least, sorcerers did get a few like minor buffs to certain skills and optimizations, but they still got a couple of nerfs on some of their popular passives, which seems unwarranted. So I was definitely expecting the sorcerer to get buffed significantly, but they ultimately did it. So I do think Blizzard kind of dropped the ball on that one, especially considering how popular this sorcerer was. But then again, things are still somewhat up in the air because we haven't technically tested, especially the new Malignant Hearts, right? Maybe with sorcerers, if they use the right combination of Malignant Hearts alongside some of the abilities that were buffed, they might actually be quite good with some specific builds, right? Moving on to some general gameplay updates, and I do think that most of these are decent. The first of which being that power leveling is pretty much dead, and I'd actually sort of predicted this because it was a bit too ridiculous. Because just by standing at a dungeon entrance, if you're able to power level like 5 levels per nightmare dungeon, like you can see in my clip here, that sort of trivializes a lot of intended progression and content, as well as gives you a huge advantage by playing with a group of players of a higher level, which could have also allowed for potentially selling carries and sort of unhealthy behavior like that, right? By the way, if you want to learn the new best leveling route for Season 1, be sure to check out my detailed video in the description box below as well. So you can actually still leech experience, but the amount that you get is severely capped at I think 10 levels above your character's level instead of like the previous 100 or so. So you can get much less experience from other players doing much more difficult content. And not only that, but capstone dungeons now also have a minimum level requirement to enter, and I also think that's a good thing, with the World Tier 2 capstone dungeon having a minimum level of level 40 and the World Tier 3 capstone dungeon requiring level 60. And actually, as for just general leveling and experience gains, you actually get less now from fighting monsters of a higher level. Previously, you get like a large bonus by fighting monsters at about 3 levels above your character's level, but now that's actually been reduced per level up to 10 levels, and generally the difficulty increase from fighting monsters 10 levels above you doesn't really justify, say, the roughly 15% of extra EXP you're getting from them, unless you have like an extremely powerful build already going. And speaking of nerfs, even Helltides were somewhat nerfed as well. Specifically, the mystery chests previously requiring 175 cinders to open, and again, these mystery chests are the chests in Helltides that have the best rewards, right, as opposed to the other slot specific chests that you can find in these zones. The mystery chests now require 250 cinders to open, up from 175, and so you actually have to survive for longer as well, right? Plus the monsters are slightly stronger at 3 levels above your character level, up from 2 levels above your level. However, there is also a slight, I guess, buff to it, but we're still sort of uncertain as to its effects, which is that destroying certain objects and like destructible environment stuff in Helltides also now have a chance of dropping cinders. So that we're not sure yet how much of it will contribute to extra cinders, but I don't think it'll compensate for the massive increase in costs of the mystery chests that was implemented. On the other hand, Blizzard seems to really love Nightmare Dungeons, and to be honest, I don't mind them too much either, because they were again buffed with elites within Nightmare Dungeons dropping extra loot now, and also the end of dungeon rewards being increased to 3 rares up from 1 rare and 2 legendaries, or I suppose with a chance of being uniques, up from 1 legendary. And aside from that, there were also a couple of bug fixes, most significantly with the Cold Enchanted Nightmare Dungeon Affix, making it less likely to sort of stun lock you in a frozen state, which should be a welcome change to most players, and especially druids that might be missing their perma unstoppable, with the new nerf to Grizzly Rage of course. And onto some other miscellaneous changes. The overworld in World Tiers 3 and 4 actually no longer scale directly to your level after a certain point, with monsters starting to trail behind your level, starting at level 55 in World Tier 3 and level 75 in World Tier 4 respectively, which will make players feel like they're actually getting stronger, or at least not becoming weaker relative to those monsters. But as a result of this change, some people might be worried of getting less experience from under-leveled monsters essentially, but that's where Whispers come in, because Whispers, the individual ones, when you complete them, you actually get a lot more experience than before as well. And lastly, although quite rare, silent chests were not providing very good rewards at all, and so now their rewards have supposedly been buffed significantly, which is definitely a welcome change too. And with that, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out my Season 1 guides linked below, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.